So I'm just covering it today, but on Friday, the ACC announced they extended invitations to Stanford and Cal out of the Bay Area, and then SMU out of Dallas. And this was accepted by 12 out of the 15 members. Florida State, Clemson, and USC voted no due to potential increase in travel costs and then the potential loss of the revenue share from the media rights deal. Now, the ACC needed 12 out of the 15 members to approve this, and NC State was originally on the fence, but they eventually flipped to supporting the measure after ESPN announced that there would be another $50 to $70 million for the conference in the current media rights deal to prevent dilution of the revenue share, the revenue splitting, and the increased cost due to travel. However, you can't just divide this additional money by the number of schools because some of this money will be used for the conference's new postseason rewards system. Now, what's interesting about this is that Stanford and Cal agreed to accept only 30% of their share of the revenue that they would get from the distribution from the media rights deal. So this is going to be for the first 7 years of them being in the conference, and then after that, the revenue percentage is going to increase by a certain amount for 3 years until by their 10th year, both schools are at 100% of their share of the revenue deal. And then SMU, who's just happy to be part of the conference, has decided to forego all their media rights revenue for the next 9 years, in which I assume in year 10, because there's still 13 years left on the deal, I assume in year 10 they would be full members as far as the media rights deal is concerned. But, as dramatic as that headline is for both Stanford and Cal and then SMU, it's not like these schools are getting nothing. It's just strictly from the media revenue, they're only getting 30% of that money. They're still going to get money from non-media related revenue, like I'm sure there's a way of ticket sales breakdown that's split. There's NCAA distributions, stuff like that. And from what I looked up, that still amounts to about $9 million per year. So like I said, it's not like these schools are getting absolutely nothing as by joining the ACC. And for SMU, when they were part of the American Athletic Conference, the AAC, they were getting $10 million a year anyway at best. So this really is not that much of a letdown for them. And then on top of that, there's already talk of this additional exposure dramatically increasing donations and boosters for that program. So let's talk about the benefits of adding these schools to the ACC. The first one off the bat is that they're now the second largest conference in college sports. They now have 17 full-time members, 1 part-time member for 18 total, and the Big Ten is the only bigger one who has 18 full-time members, so they're right up there with the Big Ten. And then this also solidifies their future and protects them from the potential loss of Florida State and Clemson and others in the future, because in the media rights deal, I'm sure there's a minimum member requirement that if so many people were to void the agreement, that the agreement would be considered null. And so if those schools were to decide to leave, this still assures that there's quite a few number of members that are still part of the conference, not going to lose the media rights deal, so on and so forth, so they have that. And it will definitely prevent a total collapse from happening should something like the Pac-12 implosion happening again in another conference like the ACC. And I'm not sure how totally debated this was, but I think it's still a worthy point that there was discussion because of the level of competition, the lackluster media rights deal, that the ACC might fall out of being a top 5, Power 5 conference. And I think by adding these schools, especially Stanford, who is the top athletic department in the country by far, by adding these schools, this solidifies their Power 5 status, question mark goes away, and they go back to being just basically like everybody else. To be honest, this really just makes the ACC on par with the SEC and the Big Ten. There's really nothing otherwise special about this. They've just done what's already happened so far to the other 2 conferences. It's now a nationwide conference. They have all 3 time zones. And I think the time zone thing, which a year ago you and I weren't thinking about that much, has all of a sudden become a mandatory thing in college sports. If you're going to be a successful conference, you have to have schools in each time zone, which is counterintuitive to you and me, because you would think that the best conference is the conference that has these regional rivalries, the regional markets. You've got teams that are close together, it's geographical. But no, this is business, man. You got to be able to make money at every time of day. And now, like I said, that's now a mandate in college sports, something that, even 2 weeks ago, you and I really weren't thinking that much about. Now, I was originally very hesitant on suggesting that Stanford and Cal would join the ACC, mainly because of the long duration of the ACC's media rights deal, considering it has 13 years left and just the way it was structured. I didn't see how you added more teams to this thing. There was no more revenue to split. There was no additional way to add revenue over the course of the next 13 years. But apparently, the long duration of the deal is what actually made this happen. I don't really quite understand that, but according to the people involved, because the contract was so long, there was a lot more flexibility in being able to add teams considering that there's still so much time left on the actual deal. But the thing is about the Pac-12 schools is that they were making as much money as the ACC schools were from the media rights deal. So I think Cal and Stanford were just fine being in the Pac-12. They didn't want to leave. And I think that's one of the reasons why they weren't one of the earlier schools to announce they were jumping ship in this process, and it's why they weren't more proactive in trying to get out. Now, Stanford has a large endowment, and I'm not sure if you can use that for athletics or how any of that works, but I'm sure with boosters and other methods, they have a lot of ways of raising revenue to offset this somewhat temporary loss. But for reading about Cal, they have the most debt. Their athletic department has the most debt of any athletic department across all of college sports. About $450 million they're in debt. And from what I read about this really just stems from a 2011 renovation of their stadium. So, I don't really know how much of a problem the debt really is for them. I don't think, losing revenue from the media rights deal is helpful for them. But with loans on like stadium debt, I would think that's something that you can refinance, restructure. I don't think that's something that's really on top of mind for them getting that paid off. And Cal, who's never taken sports seriously, I think is betting on this increased exposure, this nationwide profile, to increase their boosters and alumni donations, which will also help offset this revenue loss. So after Colorado, Utah leave for the Big 12, UCLA, USC, Oregon, and Washington leave for the Big 10, and then you have Stanford and Cal leaving for the ACC, that leaves Oregon State and Washington State. And you're down to 2 teams. What do you do? Where do you go? Mountain West Conference? Maybe, probably. I think what's crazy is that the athletic director from Washington State has said that he would like to rebuild the Pac-12 conference. I don't know who you would get to sign up for a brand new conference. I mean, basically, you'd have to rebuild the Pac-12 conference from the ground up. It's not going to be anything like it was before. He says that is his most preferred solution, but obviously that's not really that realistic. Oregon State, who's actually killing it in college football, supposedly this year, they're starting the season ranked. They could go to the Mountain West Conference. I'm sure they would be fine. I kind of question whether the level of competition there is right for them. I think they should really push to try to be part of the Big 12, but I don't know how consistent Oregon State's football program is anyway, so maybe the Mountain West is appropriate for them. Now, in the hopes of Washington State's athletic director that the conference is rebuilt, there's also talk of maybe rebranding an existing conference to be the Pac-12. So maybe rebranding the Mountain West Conference as the new Pac-12 or rebranding the AAC as the Pac-12, which, is the Pac-12 name really worth that much anymore? I mean, maybe they were a Power 5 conference, so that's something. I don't really see it happening, though. I can maybe, see if there's another round of realignment later, like you have maybe the ACC and Mountain West combine and there's some sort of collapse of one of those as part of that. Maybe you rebrand entirely as the Pac-12 conference. Maybe something like that. Maybe some teams come back. I don't know, but this is what it is for now. Now, going back to the ACC, now becoming a nationwide conference, in my opinion, this is really just the last news of this cycle. They're really just becoming more like everybody else. They're following the bold moves that have already taken place. So there's really nothing more to write home about here. Now, what I will say about all of this realignment is that college sports is now a consolidated nationwide brand that decreases focus on regional matchups in favor of better competition and broader exposure. And to me, that has winning written all over it, and I couldn't be more excited for the future of college sports and college football. Protecting regional matchups and regional markets was not a winning mentality in college sports. You saw it in the NBA, regional markets just don't work. Same thing with baseball. People want to see big brands play other big brands as often as possible. And even with all this realignment, how many blowouts did we see yesterday in week 1 of college football? I mean, when I was a kid, I would play my Saturday game, then I would come home and put on college football to take a nap. Now I'm actually somewhat excited for college football. And for those of you concerned about losing regional rivalries, I mean, most of these schools have already committed to playing each other out of conference. So I think everything about college football and college sports in general that's changed in the last several months is all wins. So that's all I wanted to cover in this video, but at some point I would like to discuss this, but at the high school level. Because as public schools keep getting larger and larger, There's increased interest in school choice. High school sports is growing just like college sports is, especially with NIL. That's having impacts at the high school level too. Demographics changing in small towns and suburbs. I just think that there's a lot of untapped potential in high school sports, and I think that we can really put the trophy generation in its grave, and there's a lot of benefits that we can unlock for both athletes, schools, and fans, all three. There's definitely more benefits to unlock there in high school athletics. So maybe we'll do a video about that later. Leave a comment on what you think about that or any info you'd like me to cover or look at in the meantime. Anyway, I hope this was an interesting elaboration on this topic. Thank you for watching.